This is a Channel Africa podcast. You can also get Channel Africa on satellite, PAS10, DSTV Audio Bouquet 802, and OpenView Bouquet, Channel 628.
Let's now discuss concerns around what others see as a growing social unrest in South Africa and what should be done to tackle the underlying causes. There is a warning of South Africa possibly facing high risk of social unrest due to issues to do with high unemployment, rising inequality, and increased lawlessness in the aftermath of the incident of the tragic Johannesburg building fire, which killed over 75 people, and the myriad of issues fueled by poorly maintained buildings and service delivery issues, problems. There is unavoidable increase in the uncertainty and volatility in communities living in urban settings. But South Africa is just one of many examples on the African continent, isn't it? Let's unpack this further and what we can glean out of these problems that are glaring in the public discourse. Helping me to discuss this is a lecturer and columnist, Dr. Pedro Mzileni. He joins me on the line. Dr. Mzileni, good evening to you and welcome to Africa Tonight.
Good evening to you and also to all listeners.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us this evening as we talk about these issues that have been put on a public domain for quite some time now. The issues of inequality and issues to do with high unemployment, which has been exacerbated by the rising cost of living in the country. There are so many social problems facing the country at the moment, Doctor, but I would like to hear your views because other scholars such as Mwele Tsimbeki and many others have been hinting for quite a while now that perhaps South Africa is teetering on the brink of a civil unrest. I would like to hear your view this evening, Doctor. Do you concur with that view that suggests that South Africa is facing a risk of a social unrest?
Well, there's social unrest in South Africa on a daily basis. You go to any province, any township, any city, there's unrest about a number of challenges ranging from the lack of jobs, the cost of living that is too high, which makes electricity, water, food, and other basic needs unaffordable. You still have students who are studying through university using loans. And you still have learners in primary education who go to school without shoes, So all these challenges are still emerging in South Africa. In other words, the way things were under apartheid, where Black African people were treated like animals by the colonizer and white settlers treated like human beings. That structure of the colonial imagination of South Africa has not changed. It has continued beyond 1994, beyond the Declaration of Independence, and it is still with us even today. The Black African is still at the bottom of the food chain, whereas the settlers are living a very comfortable life. So the structures of coloniality are still in place. They have not changed at all in all spheres of life, politically, economically, socially, intellectually, culturally, spiritually, you name it. The layers of coloniality are still with us on a daily basis in Southern Africa.
But those issues that you are mentioning, Doctor, the issues of unemployment, inequality, and the rising cost of living, those issues were brought sharply during the social upheavals that we saw in July 2021. Why do you think that we are still sitting with this problem that you are highlighting even after those challenges that were brought to the fore as a result of the social upheavals we saw after the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma?
Well, South Africa, for an example, is blessed with so many mineral resources. For an example, you have platinum, you have gold, you have diamonds beneath the soil. You also have multiple layers of land where you grow food and crops. But all these resources, they do not benefit the people of South Africa. The people of South Africa know there's gold and diamonds in their own land, but that gold and diamond is taken out of the land and then it gets transported to Europe and the West to make Europe rich, whilst the people who are left behind remain in poverty. I mean, this is the status quo actually in the whole continent. You look at a country like Niger, blessed with uranium, but that uranium only gets converted to nuclear power to make electricity for France. Yet, the whole country of Niger is in darkness. It does not benefit from the uranium that it has. So, what this means is that the policies of colonialism remain in place. Africa remains the center where wealth is extracted from, and all that we do is simply buy finished products. In other words, the actual jobs that were supposed to be created in the manufacturing sector, had we kept resources in the continent, though all those jobs have now shifted to the global north, and then in the past 20 years, those jobs have now shifted to Asia. So countries like China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the whole factory economy has moved to that region, and it has created massive jobs for the Asian countries, whereby in the past 20 years they've been able to move billions of people out of poverty into the middle class because of that manufacturing sector. So if industrialization is destroyed in your continent through the carelessness of the policy decisions taken by various African governments after colonialism was legally declared to be over, have now landed us in this crisis. The majority of people who stay in Africa are all below the age of 35, which means they are all ready for the labor force. But if the resources are not being kept in Africa, it means they will remain jobless. So that is the crisis we have. The policy decisions we have taken concerning the economy, they still keep Africa under the control of their colonial powers, but we are unable to tap into our own wealth to create working opportunities for our own people.
It is a big problem, Doctor, because as you mentioned, the continent of Africa is blessed with so many natural resources, and young people are making up the majority of the continent. And if this problem of unemployment is not addressed, it will create so many problems that we are not going to be able to face in the future. But what do you think should be done? Because it suggests to me that there is a problem here of poor governance.
Yeah, we need to break down this neo-colonial control that the West still has on Africa. And that neo-colonial control is also enabled by the elites we have in our own governments across Africa. You know? So the economic and the political policy environment needs to be changed drastically. And that requires young people to rise up, stand up and challenge these old regimes who seem to be loyal to Europe instead of their own people, you know. So you will never achieve full employment, my brother, if you don't put industrialization at the center of your economic policy, you know. The factory economy needs to return to Africa because if you look at cities like Kinshasa, you look at Lilongwe, you look at Nairobi, Lagos, you even look at Harare and Johannesburg, all those big cities, they emerged in the last 200 years when the period of the Industrial Revolution was beginning to take foot in the continent. Of course, we cannot deny that the industrialization of the continent also took place alongside colonialism and apartheid as well. But you could say that the colonizer needed an industrial Africa to build their colonial economy, and they used the Africans as cheap labor into the city to achieve those those economic dividends for Europe. But now you need to return back to those types of models, but now you need to use more democratized models, such as the one suggested in the Africa Agenda 2063 document, which speaks about the creation of an Africa without borders, an Africa where there will be a free movement of people, an Africa that will have a connected infrastructure so that you are able to move a diamond from Cairo to Cape Town within a space of 24 hours. So if we could have the breakdown of all these silos we have, where Africa is able to trade with itself, where Africa is able to keep its own mineral wealth, where Africa is able to use the young talent it has and basically punch at its true potential using its own resources. Basically, an Africa that is self-reliant, an Africa that is able to feed itself. That is the kind of an attitude and a mindset now that you need at the level of the state if you're going to change the situation of the continent.
Talk to me about the kind of impact do you think that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will have when it comes to the issue of industrialization that you are mentioning? Because there's no doubt, Doctor, that industrialization is a key component when it comes to economic development here on the African continent. What of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that you think can benefit the African continent with regard to the issue of industrialization?
That is a very good question. It's just that many journalists, whenever they ask politicians about the Africa Free Trade Agreement, they don't do proper research about that free trade agreement. Firstly, the African Free Trade Agreement will only be a success for Africans if you have strong states. Firstly, you need very strong states that are in total control of their own resources. That is how, firstly, you are going to be able to create an environment where Africa is self-reliant and in control of its own wealth. And once you are in control of your own wealth, then you'll be able to determine the rules of trade. So if Nigeria is looking for a diamond in South Africa, that free trade would be impossible if those trade rules, those trade relations, and even that diamond is controlled in Europe. And also, if you keep the borders the way they are, I mean, for me to travel from South Africa to Sierra Leone, I first need to connect through Paris in France. There's no train available that will take me from Johannesburg straight to Freetown. So the basics need to be in place first. Africa needs strong states that are going to control their own resources first. Secondly, the strong states must also build an enabling infrastructure that will facilitate this free trade we talk about. Thirdly, you need to also break down the mentality and the paradigm of the nation state. Africa needs one currency, one passport. I must move freely across the whole continent without facing harassment, abuse, or any type of a xenophobic attack if I have a skill to offer in a different region in the continent. So unless you address those three things through having strong states that are in control of their resources, that are committed to serving people, that Africa Free Trade Agreement will not succeed.
Talking about South Africa, because South Africa is way ahead when it comes to issues of infrastructure and issues of industrialization, Doctor. Do you think that the country is not punching it's not it's not where it is supposed to be in terms of leading the way on the African continent, and because many people are looking at South Africa to see what South Africa is doing in order to address those problems. What do you think South Africa needs to do to show the way, show the light, as it were, for the continent? Because South Africa is way ahead when it comes to issues to do with infrastructure and industrialization aspects.
Well, with South Africa first, you need to look at the country carefully.
Yeah.
Because the infrastructure you speak of that is developed, it's not entirely enjoyed by all South Africans, you know. South Africa is strongly under the control of Europeans, you know. It's a settler colonial society where all developed areas of the country, it's where white people live, and it is where they have control of the economy, you know. The black majority lives in absolute poverty, you know. And of course, understanding the situation in the continent and how many countries have been ravaged by wars, by poor governance, by conflicts, even by neocolonialism, and economic neocolonialism. Many Africans have run away from their countries of origin for obvious reasons, and they've settled in South Africa where there is a form of stability, you know. So if you look at a country like Johannesburg, for an example, and you walk across the CBD, you are going to find there many nationalities from the African continent, which is something that is natural, you know, because South Africa is relatively stable, it's relatively peaceful. If you come to South Africa with an idea to start a business, the environment is conducive for you to do that. But now, the fellow African citizens coming into South Africa, they come across South Africans who are also poor, looking for the same type of livelihood, you know. So that's why you will find major cities in South Africa being these melting pots of all types of Africans looking for a living. But all of them, they are trying to look for a living in an economy owned by Europeans, in an economy owned by white settler South Africans, you know. And they are the ones who control over 90% of the wealth in South Africa, you know. So the contestations, therefore, that take place sometimes amongst the Africans themselves, it's contestations that are fueled by those who own the white economy, because what they do, they divide the labor force amongst Africans, whereby they look for the cheapest labor available. And then you find that Africans now become jealous of others who get employed in the white retail sector. And then that's where the conflict breeds. But if we're able to look at South Africa very carefully, we would realize that at the core of the problem is the Europeans who are inside the country and who are in control of its economy. And the devastating impact that ownership and control of the white economy has for Africans who are inside the country.
And talking about the issue to do with South Africa, we know that South Africa's official unemployment rate stands at about 33%, which is the highest in the world, Doctor. And this, makes the job of politicians and leaders who are leading the country cut out in order to address this problem. If you have just joined us tonight, my guest is Dr. Pedro Mzileni, talking to us about concerns to do with issues to do with inequality and unemployment here in South Africa, and concerns raised by some scholars that if more efforts are not being made to address those issues and other social problems here in South Africa and in other parts of the continent, there could be a risk of a growing social unrest. Dr. Mzileni, it sounds to me, having laid out all of those issues, that the ideal of a world-class African city is far-fetched. Would I be correct?
It is far-fetched. In fact, the world-class African city does not exist in South Africa, you know.
Mhm.
You can't speak of a world-class city where half of the population lives in poverty, where half of the population has no housing, you know. I mean, over 60% of South Africans are outside the property market, you know. They don't
Yeah.
own houses, they don't own any type of shelter with them. So it tells you that across the major cities of South Africa, the majority of the population still lives like animals, you know. And at the core of this problem is the advancement of very neoliberal policies by government that prioritize international investments from Europe over the needs of the locals, you know.
Mhm.
Secondly, you spoke about South Africa having an unemployment rate of 33%.
Yeah.
Well, you need to zoom into those statistics and begin to categorize them according to geography and also according to race. Once you do that, you realize that actually the unemployment rate in South Africa amongst white people is only 2%. Yet the unemployment rate amongst black people is standing at 60%.
Mhm.
So it tells you that the economic structure that we are still advancing in South Africa is the one inherited from the apartheid economy, you know, where all types of opportunities and even control of economic assets are still in the hands of white people, whereas the Africans are kicked out of the economic pyramid, and that is why, therefore, they struggle together with their children to gain employment in the formal sector. You will never create jobs, even in your own family. If you have children in your own family, about five of them, um, you won't be able to create a very good life for them unless you, as a parent, you are in control and in ownership of assets to give those kids a very good quality of life, you know.
Mhm.
So in South Africa, that's the problem you have. You have many families who are black, who don't own assets, who don't own businesses, who are not inside the economic network that the country is advancing. As a result, their children and their families and their generations are therefore kicked out of the employment sector in the country. So they are
Mhm.
left to search for opportunities in the informal sector, and that's why those rates of unemployment are as high as you see out there.
Yeah.
So unemployment in a country that is so rich. I mean, South Africa is so rich, my brother. It is so,
Mhm.
so, so rich. It has so many mineral resources, a very vibrant, manufacturing sector. Yet the rates of poverty are extremely high because the way the society is designed, it is man-made, and it is man-made to keep the African in poverty, to keep them out of accessing opportunities. You know, another way they do this is that they hold government hostage by convincing it that it must advance policies that don't prioritize the black child in giving them quality education. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, a country so rich, it makes no sense why young people are not going to university for free. You know,
Yeah.
because universities in South Africa are extremely expensive. So how then do you expect a child of a domestic worker, a child of a teacher to pay for school fees at Stellenbosch University or at Wits University? It's impossible. So with those inequalities you have in place, you need a very active government that is going to penetrate through those inequalities and provide support to those who are talented but are in need of financial support to get into higher education and ultimately to get into the employment sector, you know.
Mhm.
So the policy environment that is being driven by this government is very misplaced for the needs that South Africa needs. And the white market is enjoying these inequalities because it keeps them in power, it keeps them in control, and it is going to ensure that the legacy of apartheid gets multiplied for many generations to come unless we stand up as the youth and fight against these inequalities that we see. You know,
Mhm.
so South Africa needs that type of agitation from young people. It needs that type of activism from every young professional that is out there to change the situation for the better.
Talking about the activism, Doctor, as we wrap up briefly, talk to me about what that tells us about the dynamics that are likely to play out in next year's election here in South Africa. Briefly.
The ANC is dying. So next year you will definitely have a coalition government at a national level. But because the ANC is so big, it won't die a quick death like a person being shot in the head. It will die like a person who is probably sick from diabetes. It will take time. So at the moment, it is standing on 57% majority. But in next year's elections, I see it is going below 45%. It will be between 40 and 45%, 40 and 45%. So meaning it now needs to choose which party it will go into a coalition with between the EFF and the DA. So that is going to be the conversation in South Africa over the next 6 to 12 months. But one thing is certain: the ANC is dying.
Dr. Pedro Mzileni, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
That podcast was courtesy of Channel Africa, the African perspective.